It's February 26, 2018, and this is your scripture reading and devotional for today. Scripture reading today is Leviticus 11:24 through 12:8, Luke 15:1 through 16:13, Psalm 29, 1 through 4, and Proverbs 6, 1 and 2. The devotional today is a clip from the lesson, Offering to God What He Has Not Commanded. Leviticus chapter 10, verses 1 through 4.
The congregation of Israel had just spent over a week consecrating their newly established priesthood. Aaron and his sons would be the priests of Israel. And beginning in Leviticus chapter 8, we read about Aaron and his sons being consecrated. And then in Leviticus chapter 9, we read about the sacrifices that were made in consecration of this newly established priesthood. First, the sacrifices that were made for the priests themselves, and then the sacrifices that were made by the congregation of Israel to acknowledge or in acknowledgement of Aaron and his sons as their priests. And then we come to Leviticus chapter 10, verses 1 through 4, and immediately after the establishment of the priesthood, we read this event, this incident of Leviticus chapter 10, verses 1 through 3. It says there, Nadab and Abihu, that was Aaron's sons that were consecrated with him as the priests. Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, each took his censer and put fire in it, put incense on it, and offered profane fire before the Lord, which He had not commanded them. So fire went out from the Lord and devoured them, and they died before the Lord. And Moses said to Aaron, "This is what the Lord spoke, saying, By those who come near me I must be regarded as holy, and before all the people I must be glorified." It's such a striking contrast to what we read in the lead up to this event, the context of Nadab and Abihu's presumptuous sin that we read about there is chapters 8 and 9 of Leviticus. And as we read through Leviticus chapters 8 and 9, it's very striking to see how many times it says there that what was being done was according to the Lord's commands. It says in these two chapters, as the Lord commanded, or uses the word commanded in some form over 16 times. And when you come down to the end of Leviticus chapter 8, and you've read through there all those times where it says, as the Lord commanded, this is what the Lord commanded, as the Lord commanded, over and over again, all down through there. You come down to chapter 8 and verse 35, and it says, "Therefore you shall stay at the door of the tabernacle of meeting day and night for 7 days, and keep the charge of the Lord." There's again another reference to obeying God's commands, as He commanded. It says, to keep the charge of the Lord, so that what? You may not die. For so I have been commanded. So Aaron and his sons, notice again, did all the things that the Lord had commanded by the hand of Moses. It says there in verse 35 that this obedience to God's commandments, that it was a matter of life and death. That they were to obey God's charge, that they were supposed to keep the charge of the Lord, quote, so that you may not die. Then you go on into chapter 9. It says in chapter 9, as the sacrifices are being offered in consecration of the priest, it says in chapter 9 and verse 5, so they brought what Moses commanded. Well, Moses was giving them the commandment of the Lord. In verse 6, it says, then Moses said, this is the thing which the Lord commanded you to do. In verse 7, it says, and Moses said to Aaron, go to the altar, offer your sin offering and your burnt offering, and make atonement for yourself and for the people, offering the offering of the people, and make atonement for them as the Lord commanded. Over and over again, as the Lord commanded. Verse 10, but the fat, the kidneys, and the fatty lobe from the liver of the sin offering, he burned on the altar as the Lord had commanded Moses. Drop down to verse 21. But the breast and the right thigh Aaron waved as a wave offering before the Lord, as Moses had commanded. Over and over again, through both of these chapters, it says that what was being done was as the Lord commanded. So, when you come to chapter 10, verses 1 through 3, and you see the statement there in verse 1, at the end of verse 1, that Nadab and Abihu offered to God what he had not commanded, which he had not commanded them, it says. It becomes very clear that what has taken place here is what we refer to as a presumptuous sin. All through the two preceding chapters, you have this repeated emphasis on as the Lord commanded. But here you get to chapter 10 and verses 1 through 3, and you see Nadab and Abihu, one of the first things they do as priests. Now here they've been elevated in the sight of all Israel as the priests of Israel. And all of the congregation of Israel acknowledge them as their priests. So no doubt Nadab and Abihu were maybe feeling a little lifted up, if you will. And they commit this presumptuous sin to do something that the Lord had not commanded them. And that's what presumptuous means. The word presumptuous, even though not used here, the word presumptuous definitely is defined here. The word presumptuous means to arrogantly presume one's own will, sufficient authority for what is done. So when it says that Nadab and Abihu offered to God what he had not commanded them, well, if it's not according to his commandment, the only other option to that, the only other option to looking at God's commandments or hearing God's commandments and saying, that's what I'm going to do. Nothing more, nothing less. I'm going to do just what God commanded. The only other alternative to that is to presume to do whatever I want. And that's what Nadab and Abihu did. They committed a presumptuous sin.
Be sure to post your thoughts from today's reading in the comment section below.